Good evening, everyone. As we begin this meeting, I will ask that all present please silence your cell phones and other electronic devices, and I'll remind council that our procedure bylaw forbids the use of mobile devices during council meetings. With that, it's 6:31. I'll call this meeting to order. Land acknowledgement is an act that predates European settlement and was an opportunity for visiting Indigenous nations to acknowledge the land that they were visiting and seeking opportunities on. In Brighton, we acknowledge that we're meeting this evening on territory that is the traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe, now of Alderville. We are grateful for the opportunities that the lands and waters that we now know as Brighton provide for us and work to set policies that will help us work to be better stewards of this place. We are grateful to Indigenous neighbors who continue to work to make this place sustainable for all creation. I have a motion moved by Councillor Fredis, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that Council approve the March 4th, 2024 Council agenda as presented. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. Members of Council, do you have any declarations of pecuniary interest, and if so, please state the general nature thereof. And there are none noted. Are there any announcements this evening? I will note that flags throughout both the County of Northumberland and the Municipality of Brighton are lowered to half staff in honor of the life and service of the former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney. And with that, I will ask everyone to please take a moment of silence as we remember Mr. Mulroney's service to the country. Thank you. I have a motion moved by Councillor Fredis, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that Council adopt the February 20th, 2024 Council meeting minutes as presented. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. We have no public meeting on the agenda this evening, which brings us to delegations. Council will hear one delegation and one presentation this evening. Delegates have 10 minutes and presenters have 15 minutes to provide Council with their information. It is noted that language, content, and conduct must always remain respectful. Council will be provided with an opportunity to ask questions of clarification from the delegation and presentation representatives based on the information that they have presented. Council is reminded that this is not an opportunity to engage in debate with the delegate or presenter, nor advance a public policy position. Delegates and presenters are reminded that Council does not make decisions during the delegation or presentation portion of this evening's meeting. I will also note that the presentation 8.2 is a timed presentation, and the presenter will be here at 7:30. So assuming that Mr. Davis doesn't take us an hour to get through his 10-minute delegation, we will carry on through the agenda until 7:30 and then return back to this portion of the agenda. And with that, Mr. Davis, you're up. Thank you. We're grateful for that. You're right about that too. Hang on, we're going to get the microphone working so that people watching on YouTube and those on Zoom can hear as well. There you go. Oh. There you go.
There we go.
There you go.
Members of Council, thank you for allowing me to speak to you tonight. I am speaking on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Brian Todd Memorial Community Fund, all of whom are here tonight with the exception of Lori Wojcik. We propose, and here's the project summary in minor detail, in short detail. We propose to do the following. We will dismantle the 144-year-old barn currently located at the former site of the Memory Junction Museum. That property is now owned by Coles Timber Mart. We will reassemble it at a site of Council's choosing, although we are recommending that Codrington is the preferred choice in our opinion. To cover all costs of the project using our Cherry Zone resources and the very generous in-kind support of several local businesses. And when this completed, we would gift it to the municipality upon completion. So we're asking tonight for council's approval of this project. You see up here the project objectives. Preserving the heritage. This barn is one of the last physical reminders of an important part of Brighton's agricultural 19th century history. Obviously, deterioration of the barn will continue if nothing is done to preserve it. And I will leave discussions about the future uses of the relocated barn to the many current and likely future user groups to determine. Although, as you see in the slide, education, recreation, commerce, artisanry, and probably many, many more that we haven't thought of yet. So here's a story about hops growing in Brighton in a book that Basil McMaster, at the age of 84, wrote in 2001. He writes about how hops was grown, how it was picked, how it was dried in hops kilns. He lists the names of 27 Brighton area farmers who grew hops in those days. He relates how the imposition of tariffs by the United States on Canadian hops in the 1890s essentially killed the hops industry in Canada. And he includes an article written by the late Peter McConnell about how in 2001, Basil was working hard to save this barn from being demolished. He accomplished that feat 1 year later when it was dismantled and moved to Memory Junction. Hops is mostly used as a bittering and a flavoring agent in beer, as well as in some herbal medicines. Apparently, it's also used to stuff pillows as a remedy for sleeplessness, but I don't know if those results are proven. Hops grows as a vigorous climbing vine and can reach upwards of 12 to 15 feet in height. The next diagram just shows basically a basic drawing of a hops barn. They're all pretty basic. They all do the same thing. In come the seed cones, and they're put on top of the wood stove or the heating chamber. They're dried, cooled, and bagged, and then they're transported to a beer making facility in upstate New York. Back then, it was anyway. And apparently, the Genesee Beer Company in Rochester was a typical destination. Eugenia Bangay, in her video produced by Brighton Digital Archives, tells how many a hops shipment was initiated from Brighton's own Grand Trunk Railway Station. So you see the slides up there. Our barn is on the right. There's one in England back in 1891. They're very, very similar. The one on the left has a couple of, I think they call it cowls for the escaping of the heat. I don't know if our barn back in those days, 1880, had it or not. So our proposal, if supported by council, will ensure that the barn does not suffer the same fate as the one pictured here on the left. Of the 27 farmers identified in Basil's book, 8 of them had hops kilns. Note that many of the names on this slide are still prevalent in the area, in the Brighton area today. Today, only one of those 8 barns remains, and that's the one that I put in larger font, Willett Bedell. I hope I pronounced the name right. I don't know if that's how you did it. Anybody know Bedell? I don't see the name in any phone books or local, but I'm not aware of how it's. Beetle? Is it Beetle? Slide 12 just shows where the barn was initially located. It was on, basically, I think it was on Telephone Road north and east of Smithfield. Lot 27, concession 2. There's another picture of the same barn. You'll notice that on the right-hand side of the barn, there's some timber buttresses, and I found that word out from Art Heaney not too long ago. That it's an engineering term, I guess, but basically it was holding the wall up. So these are undated photos. So I don't know how long ago those pictures were taken. Now here is the barn being dismantled at that farm north of Smithfield, and you can see the buttresses are still in place. So they waited until the very last minute to take them down. I know that Basil McMaster is on the left. I'm not sure, but I think it might be on Arnold Bowes, but I'm not 100% sure of that. Is it? Okay, next slide, please. Oh, I better go back one. Sorry. Okay. So here's the barn being put back together at Memory Junction in 2002. So you see our proposal is not an original one. It's been done before. And when it was reassembled at Memory Junction, structural issues were addressed and resolved. You can see a lot of brand new timber in that picture. It has good bones, as attested recently by professional engineer Tim Cron of Building Alternatives, a local engineer. That's the barn as you see it today. And we will replace the metal soffits and the eaves troughs with materials that are more reflective of its original look. But I want to draw your attention as well to those two little gray squares on the right-hand side of the bottom of the picture. They're actually historical plaques depicting the history of this barn. It looks like they've been subjected to a little bit of vandalism at some point in the past. Here's the first one. The first plaque commemorates the initial construction of the barn in 1880. It is dedicated by Lola Thompson, the granddaughter of Willett Beadle. The second one commemorates the relocation of the barn to Memory Junction in 2002. And it's dedicated by Basil McMaster, the grandson of Elijah, who helped Willett Beadle build it. We will restore these plaques to their original condition and mount them in a prominent place on the barn. Next one, please. There we go. So the scope of work is a multi-step process, each step involving various suppliers and tradesmen. We will be adding a concrete pad, which will provide additional strength to the structure, and it will expand the various possibilities for the barn's use. We will carefully dismantle the siding and the roofing. I'm sure that some material will likely be damaged or need to be replaced, but we have set aside money in the budget to allow for this. Posts, beams, and trusses, and the upper floor. There's an upper floor that extends about half the length of the barn. It's about 24 feet long. So each one will be marked and to ensure that they are positioned in the same place when reassembled. Transportation. You might wonder why we can't just put on a flatbed and drive it up there. It's cost prohibitive. Apparently that was initially the thought in 2019, and it was quickly just had to be forgotten about because it's just too expensive to do that. But the hydro lines and traffic control was just too expensive. So with the help of local suppliers and businesses, we will transport all those pieces up to the designated spot, like the Hopefully Codrington, and we put it all together. And then, contrary to the laws of gravity, what goes down must go up. So all the posts, the beams, and trusses, the upper floor will be reinstalled on the concrete pad according to the markings made when they were disassembled. The siding and the roofing will be reinstalled with a combination of original and replacement materials, and weatherproofing will be given considerable attention. There may need to be put in wooden batten strips to seal the joints on the walls. Electrification. Our electrician suggests that nothing be done until the barn is in its new spot, and that the layout of plugs, switches, and lighting be first determined through discussions with the major user groups. And then finally, a painting. The fresh coat of paint will blend the original wooden components with the replacement materials. And I want to point out before I go to the next slide that all the work before them will be done by WSIB insured personnel only. So project support, it was first presented to the Brighton's Heritage Advisory Committee on September the 11th of last year. It did endorse the project on November the 6th. And I'm pleased to see that Catherine Stutt, who is a member of that committee, is here tonight. Thank you, Catherine. And Brighton Digital Archives also have recognized that the Heritage drive this project. And we have Catherine Stutt, who's also on that committee, and Ralph Dion, Citizen of the Year. Thank you, Ralph, for being here. Both of the board of Codrington Community Association and the Codrington Farmers Market Board, they supported this project when it was first introduced by Dennis Fletcher in 2019. The last remaining piece, we believe, is council support. With council support, we are ready to go and look at the businesses who want to help get this done. I was blown away when I started asking for support, and I can say that, well, you'll see, but this actually was very uplifting to me when I saw all these people who wanted to support this project. Next, please. And you can see it's been done before. This was the barn of Renee Simpson and the late Jerry and Renee Simpson, who was on a farm west of Brighton. It was moved to Proctor Park in 2002, and it was constructed. It was constructed into a theater that we now enjoy today. I want to go back one more place. I just forgot. I wanted to mention that we have people here on this list in the audience tonight. We have Mitch Hamilton and Brandon Freeman from Vanderland building, from Coles Timber Mart and Coles Installations. We have Bill Beaton, Loyalist Timber Framing, and Bill has a lot of experience. I'm glad he's on the team. He was involved in the move of the barn, the Simpson barn, and he had also been involved in 2002 to move this barn to Memory Junction. So we've got the skill set. We've got the institutional knowledge to make this happen. Thanks, Bill, for being here. And we also have from Vanderland Building Products and Installations, Gerald Dreister. I couldn't do this without Gerald. Thanks, Gerald. Now we can go to the next slide. Yeah, if you look, Peter McConnell's on the left-hand side front row. Right behind him is a young Bill Beaton. Right, Bill? Yes. I want to conclude my presentation by extending a thank you to the following people. Please. Basil McMaster. Thank you, Basil. If it hadn't been for Basil back in 2002, that barn would have been demolished. So we really want to thank Basil for saving a part of Brighton's heritage. And of course, Ralph Bangay. Ralph gave the barn a new home. He provided an historical experience for those who visited his museum. And I'm very pleased tonight to see that Ralph and Jeannie Bangay's daughter, Lynn, and their son-in-law, Art Heaney, are in the audience this evening. Thanks for coming. And I want to say thank you to Coles Timber Mart, particularly George and Mitch. Mitch is here. Mitch Hamilton, for donating the barn to the Brian Todd Memorial Community Fund. When they were approached last summer, they were quick to offer the barn as they recognize the historic significance of this structure and they want to see it preserved. And most of all, thanks to Dennis Fletcher. He initiated this project in 2019. Then COVID hit, and then he got sick. Had these two events not happened, I have no doubt that he would have been successful in completing this project 3 years ago. Next, please. So this was a timely word jumble in the Toronto Star a few weeks ago. The farmer says to his wife, "It really is inspiring to see everyone coming together." The key message, when people came together for the barn raising, it was uplifting. That's why I gave you a little segue into that. So thank you, members of council. The board of directors of the Brian Todd Memorial Community Fund are asking you to give this proposal your green light. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I will ask members of council if they have any questions of clarification for Mr. Davis. It's always a good sign.
It is a good sign.
It's usually a good sign.
I should point out, Mr. Mayor, that really the only thing that we're asking of the municipality is to select the site, do the locates, make sure that we're not on septic beds or pipes from the well or whatever, and also provide obviously some make sure that we're adhering to building code and that sort of thing. So that's what we're looking to the municipality for. In other words, it's in kind, shouldn't be any cost, hard cost.
Do you have a question, Councillor Rowley? Usually when you
I
look
do,
at me like
thank you.
that, you do.
Should we add that to a motion somewhere?
So
Or
there's
is that something-
there's correspondence in the agenda, at which point we will make a decision on the subject matter. We won't make a decision with regard to the presentation that we've received, though.
Right, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Worship.
Thank you. I have a motion moved by Councillor Wheeldon, seconded by Councillor Rowley, that council receive the delegation from Bruce Davis, Secretary Treasurer, Brian Todd Memorial Community Fund regarding placement of the hops barn on municipal property. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. And again, we will receive we'll see the correspondence later in the agenda and make a decision around this at that point. The next item is deferred to 7:30, which is the presentation with regard to Watson and Associates. Madam Deputy Clerk, do we have any citizens' comments? So that brings us to staff reports. The first report is with regard to municipal office closures, December 27th, 30th, 31st, 2024. HR Manager Smith, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
No, I do not.
I have a motion moved by Councillor Fredis, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson. The council approved the closure of the municipal offices on non-statutory holidays, December 24th for the arena only, 27th, 30th, and 31st, 2024. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Next report is the 2023 Annual Compliance and Summary Report on Municipality of Brighton's drinking water system. Director Whiteman, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight, sir?
No, I do not.
I have a motion moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon. The council received the staff report. Staff report for information. Oh, I see. It's just worded differently. I apologize. That council received the staff information report dated March 4th, 2024 regarding the 2023 Annual Compliance and Summary Report on the Municipality of Brighton's drinking water system. Is there any discussion? Councillor Fredis.
Through the chair, thank you. I do have a few questions, if I may, to Director Whiteman.
We'll start with one and see where it goes.
Okay. In reading the report, and it was very comprehensive, and I thank you. My takeaway is that there appears to be 3 permits and licenses required. A permit to take water, which is due for renewal October 2024. A water license, which is due for renewal May 2025, and an accreditation, which is due in January 25. So my question is, are these under control? Do you anticipate any problems? And did I miss any licenses or permits that might be required in reading the report?
Director Whiteman.
I'm going to defer to Mark, our supervisor of water.
All of them are under control, yes. Our permit to take water does expire in October. It will be early in the spring here, probably May. We will start making out the application process for the new one.
Yeah. Thank you.
A couple of follow-ups, if I may.
I'm going to go over to Councillor Wright and then I'll come back to you. Councillor Wright.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just had a question on how many users are there currently of the water system?
Director Whiteman.
To the best of my knowledge, I think we have from the water billing department 3,324 households. Okay, 3,380, somewhere in that ballpark.
Okay. Councillor Fredis.
Through the chair, thank you to Director Whiteman. In reading the report, they talk about a detention pond, and it indicates that the flow through the detention pond in 2021 was 613 cubic meters, 2022, 648 cubic meters, and then in 2023, it jumped to 1319 cubic meters. Could you kind of enlighten me as to the purpose of the detention pond and the significance of the volumes in the detention pond, what they're there for?
I'll defer to Mark again.
So the detention pond is for when the wells first kick on. In case there's any sediment in the well water, it pumps to the pond instead of into our reservoir. for the first 5 minutes. Last year, one of our wells were making a little more sand than we like to see. Our hydrogeologist suggested that we pump that one to waste for 20 minutes. That's why you see the higher numbers. And it has since been rectified.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Fredis?
Thank you, Chair. If I may continue, I have three more questions. In looking at the average and max water takings, we've gone from 2021 an average of 2409, which is 37% utilization, and its max in that year was 4306, which was 67%. It grew a little bit in 2022, and then dropped back down again in 2023 to 60%, max utilization 35% averaged. But I note in the MEC report that they're advocating for conservation measures. I'm not quite sure I understand why they would be advocating for that unless they just felt compelled to write something. Could you maybe enlighten me a little bit as to the significance of that comment from MECP in light of these numbers?
So it's really a provincial wide thing that the ministry is putting out for conservation. It doesn't really pertain to us. We don't take water from lakes or rivers that have highs and lows. But it's, like I say, it's provincial wide. It really doesn't pertain to us.
Which is why we do still have a water use bylaw that allows certain people to use water at certain times. It is for conservation purposes and to make sure we're complying with those requests from the province.
And we do follow the Lower Trent Conservation if they issue certain orders to, lower your usage. We ask customers to do that as well.
You may carry on if you want.
Thank you, through the chair. I note in the MEC report that they issued a compliance rating of 97.22 for last year, deducting 2.78 risk rating over frequency of monitoring organics and inorganics. I gather in reading the report that was done. And I'm wondering again if similar to last year, was this kind of a technical requirement that they write you up and deduct your points? Or did we have a real issue in terms of timing of issuing the reports?
Yeah, that is more of a timing issue. We sampled it late. We didn't miss it. Just because it's one of our parameters that we sample every 3 years. So since then, they've made us do up a new sampling schedule, which I have presented to them. They have passed it, and it's good for the next 12 years.
Well, good. My last question, fellows, and I'll leave you alone. The report mentions 3 opportunities for improvement. And the internal QMSR identified 5 opportunities for improvement. Interestingly enough, the water reports in 2021 and 2022 also indicated 3 and 4 opportunities for improvement. So I guess my questions are these the same opportunities, or are they new opportunities that have been identified? Are any of these consistent with measures you need to take to ensure timely testing? And lastly, are the impediments to establishing these improvements related to staffing and the adequacy of staffing?
So for improvement, these ones are all new, except for the staffing, which was on last year as well. But they're not mandatory. It's not something we have to do. It's something they like to see you look into and try and rectify. And the staffing one was one that they picked up again this year. Yes.
Anything further, Councillor Fredis?
I'm fine. Thank you very much. Appreciate the answer.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions or comments with regard to the motion or the report? All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion's carried. Next report is the use of Ferguson Hill Road by the Department of Defense, Canadian Armed Forces. Director Whiteman, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight, sir?
No, well, yes, just on, just thinking about that, I think I saw something where it says our property or your property. It should say our property. I don't know where that is, but it's somewhere in there. I think it's on the second page. And it would be under the analysis and comments on part A. It says to be on your property, so it should be our property, municipality's property.
Thank you. A motion moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon, that council receive the staff report dated March 4th, 2024, pertaining to the municipality of Brighton entering into a license agreement with the Department of National Defence of the Canadian Armed Forces. It is also recommended that council receive and approve the license agreement between the municipality of Brighton and the Department of National Defence of the Canadian Armed Forces, and that it directs staff to provide a copy of the agreement. In addition, it is recommended that council enact the required bylaw authorizing the mayor and the clerk to sign the licensing agreement on behalf of the municipality of Brighton, coming into effect on the date of the signature. Is there any discussion? Councillor Wright?
I was just wondering, is this been an ongoing thing that they do? Is this, or is this something new?
This is about our third year doing this. First 2 years it was done through the fire department, and this year it's Public Works because it's a roadway, I guess. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. Next staff report is branding, logo, refresh, draft, and direction. Mr. Hagerman, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
Through your worship, definitely a lot going on here, but the concept is that this is not in the strategic plan. This is not in my work plan. It's simply something that I concocted to take on my own. And we're just looking for direction from council to even see if this is on the radar, and if it is, some direction to continue the path forward, whatever that may or may not be. Thank you.
I have a motion moved by Councillor Wheeldon, seconded by Councillor Wright, that council receive this report for information and provide direction to staff to continue to develop a new brand and logo for the municipality of Brighton. Is there any discussion? Councillor Fredis.
Through the chair to Mr. Hageman. First off, Mr. Hageman, thank you for taking this on, even though it's not part of the plan. It's been a topic of conversation, I guess, with my council colleagues and I for a little while now, the possible need for a refresh of the look of Brighton. So I think directionally it's a good way to go. The one thing that I would like to kind of maybe throw out for consideration is perhaps we open this up to the residents to participate, to give them some say in what the look of logo, community's logo will look like going forward. I'm pretty sure we have some pretty talented artists and designers around town, and maybe we put a notice out and give them 30 or 45 days or whatever time you feel is appropriate to let them submit some design ideas and concepts of their own. Do you have any thoughts or comments on that? And is that a workable situation that maybe would take a little bit of the load off of you, but get us directionally going where we need to go with the new look?
Mr. Hagerman?
Through the mayor, with all due respect to the, residents of Brighton and your question, Councillor, I'd like to keep it kind of to the professionals that have already kind of got us going. I think there's definitely a time and place for resident input and feedback. But I think I'd like to at least start with what we have and make adjustments through resident feedback, not the adjustments through their design, but more through what they would like to see as part of the logo, and then have the actual graphic designer that I've started working with make those adjustments as we go, if that makes sense.
Councillor Wright.
If that's the case, and kudos to whoever, was it you who put it together or was it Bea Quinty?
Yes, so, sorry, I can interrupt for a second.
Yeah.
Yes, so this is just another situation where there's tons of added value working with a partner like the Bay Quinty Regional Marketing Board. They have very talented, very high skill set graphic design on staff. And that's who started getting the ball rolling on this for
Okay.
us.
So I would suggest looking at this, my first thought was that it's really way too busy. When I look at a lot of the other municipalities that are around us, their logos are very simplified, 2 colors at best. You want to consider accessibility and what that potentially means for a logo. I think it's a good start, but I think we've got a ways to go before we get there. Something just a lot more simple, I think, would go a long way.
Any comment?
Yeah,
Yeah.
first draft for a reason, and we need a place to start. And I can almost guarantee it'll end up with something to this effect, but I agree. We got touches and we've got things to do before we get there.
Councillor Whelan.
I really like the symbolism that was included. I didn't really get the anchor, but aside from that, love everything. But I just wanted to, I guess, affirm the conversation that was already had about public engagement is really important, not necessarily from a design perspective, but certainly as far as public engagement goes, this kind of thing is sort of an easy one.
I agree.
Anything further from members of council? All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion's carried. Nothing in print until we say okay, right?
Absolutely.
The next staff report is the RFP for second mobile canteen. Mr. Hagerman, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight, sir?
Through the mayor, nothing major to highlight other than that it's just a very simple information report to let council know that we are going to go out for RFP to try to attract a potential second mobile canteen at King Edward Park.
Thank you, Mr. Hagerman. The motion reads, the motion is moved by Councillor Wheeldon, seconded by Councillor Wright. The council receive this report for information purposes with respect to the upcoming RFP that will be put out offering opportunities to mobile canteen operators who would like to operate in King Edward Park. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. Yeah, the next staff report is with regard to the presentation that we haven't heard yet. So with council's permission, I am simply going to defer it until after we receive that presentation. Madam Deputy Clerk, we don't need a motion to do that, do we? We can just push it off. Yeah. Thank you. That brings us to the council direction follow-up list, which is prepared for you in the agenda. I have a motion moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon. The council received the council follow-up list dated update February 2024 as information. Is there any discussion? Councillor Wheeldon.
Not intended as a criticism, but there's still a lot of blank boxes where updates might be. And I would like updates on several of those things. So in the near future, that'd be great.
CAO, is there a way we can get those updates completed for council and provided to us in advance of perhaps the next? We get this monthly? Quarterly. Could we get them updated and brought back for March, please?
Certainly.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. That brings us to motions and notices of motion. The first motion is moved by Councillor Fredis, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon, whereas the municipality of Brighton faces challenges related to limited access to transportation, and there exists a pressing need for a ride-sharing service to address transportation gaps within our community. Whereas ride-share services are increasingly relied upon by seniors, students, visitors, and tourists, and residents looking for safe, affordable, convenient, and reliable ways to travel. Whereas the standardization and consistency of regulations across municipalities, particularly in Ontario, can improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the regulatory framework. And whereas transferring the responsibility of rideshare regulations and licensing to the provincial level would contribute to a more streamlined and uniform governance structure while eliminating associated red tape and unnecessary administrative costs. Therefore, be it resolved that the Municipality of Brighton Council hereby expresses its support for the migration of rideshare regulations and licensing from the municipal level to the provincial level. Be it further resolved that the Municipality of Brighton Council formally requests the Government of Ontario to initiate the transfer of responsibilities in the interest of creating a more coherent and standardized regulatory framework for rideshare services across the province. And be it further resolved that copies of this motion be distributed to the Honourable Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, the Honourable Prabmeet Sakaria, Minister of Transportation, the Honourable Paul Calandra, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, the Honourable David Piccini, Member of Provincial Parliament for Northumberland Peterborough South, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus, the County of Northumberland, and all 6 neighbouring Northumberland lower tier municipalities, and all Ontario municipalities. Is there any discussion? Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you. Considering most people don't take ride shares within a small town, a town the size of ours, the idea of having municipal frameworks for something that almost necessarily spans from one municipality to another is kind of silly. So this is a great example of something that should be done at a provincial level or even at a federal level. We have a federal transportation ministry as well as a provincial one. I think that anywhere other than municipal makes sense for this kind of regulation. And that's why I support it.
Thank you, Councillor Fredis.
Just further to Councillor Wheeldon's comments, the Uber folks were at Roma. I know the mayor stopped at their booth, as did I. And the one thing we heard from them is the varying municipal regulations that prohibits them from operating an effective service. For example, Quinte West has a whole different set of regulations. So a Brighton resident couldn't use an Uber, if we had one here, to take them to Walmart. Taking them from Prince Edward to Sobeys doesn't do a whole lot of good. So that's why we need the broader provincial framework to address all of those anomalies of individual municipal regulations.
I thank both Councillors Fredis and Wheeldon for bringing this to the floor. It was through those discussions at Roma that led to this wording. This has been vetted by the community, whatever the title is, community representative for Uber. It's not intended specifically for Uber. It would be for any rideshare service. My discussions with the Uber representative were simply that, what can we do to get rideshare for our community? We have no cab, no taxi service that's really broadly available to the community. We do have a taxi service. It's just not used as for local residents. And when it is, I think it's the competition would be appreciated, I think. At the end of the day, the answer was, what we need to do is have a regulatory framework that goes from Windsor to Cornwall and up to Sault Ste. Marie. So we drafted this, we got it in front of them. Our friends at Uber like the wording, and hopefully our friends at the province will see the value in moving this forward. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Next motion is moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Fredis. Whereas Twin City agreements contribute to the promotion and celebration of cultural and economic ties to a community. Whereas 2024 marks the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings on Juno Beach in Normandy, France. And whereas Rifleman Clark Lawson of Brighton survived the D-Day landings but perished in Annecy, France, while fighting to liberate the village with the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada. And whereas the municipality of Annecy has recognized Rifleman Clark Lawson by naming a street after him, Rue Clark Lawson. And whereas Mayor Nicolas Delahaye has noted that twinning Brighton and Annecy would strengthen the strong bonds between the people of Annecy, the regiment, and Canadians. Now therefore be it resolved that the municipality of Brighton Council agrees to twin the municipality of Brighton with the municipality of Annecy. And further that I, Mayor Brian Ostrander, does hereby proclaim the municipality of Brighton is twinned with the municipality of Annecy. Is there any discussion? Again, I thank Councillor Rowley and Councillor Fredis for bringing this to the floor. This was brought to me by John Stevens, who some of you may know as the son of John Stevens, who lives here in Brighton. John, the junior, is the curator of the Queen's Own Rifles Museum, and called me and said, I think this is a wonderful idea. As you know, Annecy has named a road after Clark. And I said, I did not know that. So that was news to me. The regiment is going over, the Queen's Own Rifles are going over to Annecy for the 80th celebration. And it would be my hope that if we pass this, that we would send something recognizing our twinning of the two communities. Would you like to go? I don't think that's in the bylaw that's coming forward. Is there any further discussion? Go ahead,
Sorry,
Councillor
when
Wright.
is that celebration?
June 6th.
June
It's the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Yeah. Any further discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. And I would point out that I do believe Mr. Stevens and Mayor Delahaye was saying they were going to try to tune in tonight to watch whether this happened or not. So we can look forward to the municipality of Annecy doing the same, and we'll get correspondence that way back. So thank you, everyone. 12.3 is a notice of motion, which we will read as a motion on the 25th of March, I believe. There's no unfinished business listed here, which brings us to bylaws. Sorry, I'm just watching the time. He'll chime in though, right? He's coming by Zoom, I assume? Yeah, okay. The first bylaw is a license agreement between the Department of National Defence, Canadian Armed Forces, and the Municipality of Brighton. It's moved by Deputy Mayor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Fredis. The council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date. Being a bylaw to authorize the mayor and the clerk to execute an agreement between the Department of National Defence, Canadian Armed Forces, and the Municipality of Brighton regarding a license agreement. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. Next bylaw is with regard to remuneration rates for members of council. It's moved by Deputy Mayor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Fredis. The council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date, being a bylaw to establish the remuneration rates for the municipality of Brighton members of council. Is there any discussion? Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Mayor. There's a couple of things in here that I think still need a little bit of tweaking before I will be supportive. The mileage issue, I believe we still have it in there from the homes of councillors and to the municipal office. I don't think that's required. I would also like to ask the question, and I'm not sure if Mr. Puffer can answer, but I do believe that the first 100 kilometers per month are the responsibility of each councillor. So, and I don't see that in this as well. So I'm wondering if that needs to be included. One more comment, and then I will hand it over. And I'm still not sure regarding the allocation of the $2,000 towards personal health spending. I would still like to wait until the CAO has kind of reviewed that before I support this.
Thank you. Councillor Fredis.
Through the chair, thank you. Just to follow up on the health spending thing, It was my understanding that if anything on compensation came forward, it would exclude that provision in order for the CAO to have a look at that to see about the costing. And that would come back in a later report. So, little uncomfortable with the fact that it's in here and we don't have the answers on what that's really going to cost and or policy on how it would be implemented. Relative to mileage, I wasn't aware of the 100-mile deduction thing. It was my understanding always that anything within a municipality was not a mileage allowance. It's only when you traveled outside the municipality. And I guess I'm wondering why we wouldn't go back to the policy as that was.
Yeah, it was my understanding that we would have a bylaw that would be written essentially providing us with the recommendations of the consultant, which was mileage outside the municipality and more discussion on the additional health benefit as well. But does council want to refer this back to staff? Is that the request? The council refers the council remuneration bylaw to staff for correction. Is there a mover? Councillor Rowley. Second, Councillor Fredis. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That motion's carried. No, we've referred it to staff, so there's no need to then vote it down because I'm just going to write referred on here. And I do see that Mr. Simcisko, I think that's how I pronounce your name, Peter, is here. Is council okay moving into that presentation? So Peter, we're ready for you. And I will turn the floor over to you for your presentation on the water and wastewater study, sir.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for having me. Let me just get set up here. I will be sharing my screen to walk through a presentation. All right, and I believe we should be live on the screen now.
We can see your presentation.
Thank you for confirming. So good evening, everyone. I'm Peter Simcisko with Watson & Associates Economists Ltd. And our firm was retained by the municipality to undertake a water and wastewater rate study, which is due for an update as the last one was completed by the municipality back in 2017. And that study will also include a water financial plan, which is required by Regulation 45307 as part of the one of the requirements as part of the water license renewal process as well. The rate study update is being undertaken with specific regard for several items, and I'll get into the details of this in a little bit more detail shortly. But at a very high level, we are looking at the current customer profile, so your customers that are connected to the water wastewater systems, as well as the consumption of those customers to help us assess what the rates should be to sustain those systems into the future in light of that customer profile. We are going to be taking into account updated growth forecast for the municipality as well to understand how that customer profile and total consumption is going to change over the forecast period. We are also taking a very close look at the infrastructure that supports the provision of water wastewater services through this process as well, to understand what kind of funding requirements exist with respect to that infrastructure to ensure that the municipality can replace and renew that infrastructure as it comes up for renewal. And then we're also taking a look at the capital and operating forecasts for the forecast period. So firstly, I would like to provide a high-level overview of the methodology that is employed in undertaking a water and wastewater rate study. And so the process starts with the growth forecast, which identifies the number of new customers that may connect to the water and wastewater systems in future years as a result of development in the municipality. And then related to that is the amount of additional consumption that's expected to result from that customer growth. The growth forecast then informs how many customers and how much water consumption the total costs of operating the water and wastewater systems will be shared amongst. Now, with that additional growth, there may also be a need for infrastructure upgrades or expansion. And therefore, to some extent at least, the growth forecast also informs the capital works requirements over the forecast period. We also have other capital needs potentially arising from legislative changes that may require updates to treatment or monitoring processes, for example, or to localized issues with the infrastructure, as well as general asset management planning for, again, the ongoing upkeep, renewal, replacement of the infrastructure as it ages and requires that life cycle replacement. So those capital works requirements are then translated into a 10-year capital budget forecast. And then relative to that capital budget forecast, we are looking at financing options, such as connection fees or development charges to growth-related components, infrastructure upgrades and expansion, as well as utilizing debt in some cases to mitigate rate spikes and to finance bigger expenditures for longer term. And lastly, also reserves and reserve funds. Now, as a result of the financing decisions that are made, there may be some capital related expenditures such as debt servicing costs, which then flow through to the operating forecast as the principal and interest payments have to be made. In addition to the capital related expenditure, we also have the operating forecast, which includes things like salaries, utility costs, as well as materials and supply costs, for example. And then finally, because capital needs tend to be I'll say lumpy in nature, in the sense that there may be years with a few large projects and then a number of years with relatively low capital investment needs. We utilize the capital reserves as a stabilization mechanism, building relatively constant annual contributions to those reserves from the operating budget, and then draw on the reserves as needed to pay for capital needs in any particular year. And then once we bring the capital and operating forecasts together with consumption and user forecast, we can calculate the rates that would be required to support, again, the sustainable operation of the water and wastewater systems. So one of the key components of developing a rates forecast, as I just mentioned in the overall overview of the methodology, is understanding that future customer profile and the level of consumption that we're expecting to be associated with those customers in the future. Now, that analysis of that future customer growth and consumption patterns will be informed by the growth forecast that is currently being developed through the municipality's development charges background study. And so in light of the fact that that is still in development as we speak, we're well into that development charges study now, but to better align this rate study process with that growth forecasting as part of the development charges background study, the water and wastewater rate study is being completed in two distinct phases in this case. And so the phase one of this process, given that we don't yet have that detailed updated growth forecast available quite yet, has involved a preliminary assessment of some of the financial information with a particularly looking at 2024 budgets for the municipality's water and wastewater systems and operations, and then looking at what rates would need to be put in effect for 2024 and whether a change is required relative to the rates that were in effect last year to support the operation of those systems for this year. And so that preliminary analysis was completed just at the end of February of this year. And so that's going to be the primary focus of the presentation today. But there will be a second phase, which is more involved. And again, once we have a good handle on the growth forecast for the municipality, we are going to be developing that comprehensive forecast of operating and capital expenditures over a 10-year forecast period, so 2025 and beyond. And then forecasting out rates to ensure the sustainable operation of those systems over the 10-year forecast period and beyond. And as I mentioned in the introductory comments, that rate study or rate forecast will also be accompanied by a water financial plan, which is required by Regulation 45307. And we're expecting the completion of that second phase of work in the third quarter of this year, at which point we'll come forward to Council again with a presentation and a detailed analysis of that forecast as well. And that will be accompanied by a detailed water wastewater rate study report at that time as well. So looking at the summary of the first phase of this assessment, the first item we have here is just a summary of the current rate structure that's in place for water and wastewater services. And that rate structure comprises several components. Firstly, there are monthly base charges which are imposed based on the number of residential units, or for non-residential customers based on the meter size. And then bulk water customers are also charged a monthly account fee, which is shown at the bottom of the first table. So again, the first table on the slide here summarizes that monthly base charge components, showing the rates that are currently in effect, which were the rates that were imposed in 2023. In addition to the monthly base charges, customers are also charged a rate that's applied to the volume of water that they consume over the billing period, as measured by their water meter. And there are three types of metered rates that are imposed in the municipality currently, and we can see those in the bottom table on the slide. So firstly, there are the general service rates, which apply to most customers in the municipality. We then have some area-specific rates, which are charged to customers in the Presqu'île Park area. And I'll come back to those area-specific rates a little bit later in the presentation in more detail. And then finally, there are rates that apply to bulk water users as well, which are shown at the bottom of the second table. So in terms of the financial analysis that was completed, firstly, we, as a starting point, looked at the current customer profile, looked at the current level of consumption based on records from 2023. We've also been able to do some historical trend analysis in that regard as well, to see how that customer profile and how consumption patterns have evolved since the 2017 rate study was completed. And so as a first step, we applied the rates that were forecasted in the 2017 rate study to the current consumption levels and to that current customer profile to get a sense of the level of revenue that would be generated to support these systems if the 2024 rates that were forecasted in the 2017 rate study were imposed. So then having an understanding of what those revenues would be generated based on those rates, we compared those revenues to the budgeted operating expenditures for 2024, which were based on the preliminary 2024 operating budget, as well as the longer-term infrastructure funding needs, which were based on an assessment undertaken in the 2022 asset management plan, which identified the quantity, the extent of the municipality's water, wastewater infrastructure, the replacement costs, as well as what those long-run funding requirements would be to support the sustainable replacement and renewal of that infrastructure as it comes due. And so what we found through that assessment is that the 2024 water and wastewater rates, again, as were identified in the 2017 rate study, would be expected to generate sufficient revenue to cover all of the operating costs that are budgeted for 2024. And in addition to those operating costs, the revenues would be sufficient to cover approximately 55% of that long-run average annual infrastructure funding requirement. So there is still a little bit of a funding gap that certainly exists in that regard in terms of those long-term capital requirements, which would signal that further rate increases will be needed in 2025 and beyond to close that annual infrastructure gap. But again, that's something that will be addressed in detail as part of the multi-year rate forecast that will be presented, developed first of all, and then presented through phase 2 of the study. On a side note, what's been interesting is that the revenues are relatively close to what was estimated for 2024 in the 2017 rate study. And that's despite the fact that overall consumption levels are down from what was forecasted at that time. However, the municipality has seen more customer growth relative to what was forecast in that 2017 rate study. And so the base charge revenues have picked up the slack, if you will, for the reduced consumption levels. The other thing that we're seeing is that operating costs are coming in significantly higher relative to what was forecast in the 2017 rate study for 2024. And so what that has done is displaced some money from the capital needs, which is why there continues to be a infrastructure funding gap, as illustrated on the slide here, which again will need to be addressed over the forecast period. So the other item that we wanted to look at through this phase one or first component of the assessment were the area-specific rates charged within Presqu'île Park area. And so to give you a little bit of background or history on this, back in 2003, the municipality entered into an agreement to extend some water infrastructure and wastewater infrastructure along Presqu'île Parkway to provide servicing to Presqu'île Provincial Park. The agreement that was put in place at that time specified that the municipality had the ability to impose higher usage rates on customers connected to that extended infrastructure. But what it also stipulated is that any new properties connecting to that extended infrastructure would be paying those same higher rates as well. And so in recent years, there has been some development in the area that has resulted in additional customers connecting that extended infrastructure, and those customers are now being charged at those higher rates that are applicable to the Presqu'île Park area, in line with that agreement, again going back to 2003. And so one of the things we look at, and certainly to ensure the equitable treatment of all customers at this time, it would be recommended that the area-specific usage charges that are applicable in that area be eliminated, and that all of the municipality's customers be charged a constant usage rate. Those rates would be harmonized in that regard. So presented on the slide here are the monthly base charges and also the metered rates that are recommended for 2024. And if approved, these would take effect on April 1st. So as noted earlier, these are consistent with the rates that were presented for 2024 in the 2017 rate study, which was endorsed by council at that time. The only change being, as you can see in the bottom table on the slide here, is that the metered for properties in the Presqu'île Park area are recommended to be equalized with the general service metered rates in that regard. So in terms of the impact that these 2024 rates would have on the average residential customer, the annual bill would be approximately 6% higher than the bill that that same customer would have seen in 2020, based on these recommended rates for 2024. And that corresponds to an increase of about $66 for the year, or about $5.50 per month for, again, any customer that's outside of that Presqu'île Park area. And so with that, we have some recommendations that are presented to council for consideration. Firstly, that would be to approve the 2024 water and wastewater rates that have been presented in this presentation with an effective date of April 1st. We would also recommend council consider the elimination of the area-specific usage rates for the Presqu'île Park area. Finally, to direct staff to prepare and bring forward a new water and wastewater fees and charges bylaw for adoption. That concludes the formal part of the presentation, and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, sir. I will open the floor to members of council for questions of clarification, and I will note there is a staff report that we will be discussing after we discuss the presentation, which will be more specific to the actual rates and how we're moving forward. But members of council, any questions of clarification? Councillor Fredis.
Through the chair to Peter. Peter, on the last page, customer impact analysis, the little footnote says that the calculation was done on the basis of 166 M3 of annual water consumption. But your report in 2017, page 2.1, indicated that water consumption for new users has been estimated at 175 M3. I'm just curious why the reduction in that number from 175 to 166.
Yes, thank you for the question. That goes back to some of the, we have been able to take a close look at consumption patterns since that 2017 rate study was put together. And what we have seen is that since that time, the average consumption per user has been coming down. And so while it was identified at 175 cubic meters per customer back in 2017, we have seen that consistently coming down, and currently based on 2023 consumption levels and the number of customers connected to the systems, that average consumption level is down to 156 cubic meters per user. And that's just for some additional context, that is a trend that we're seeing quite consistently right across the province, that those average consumption levels are coming down. And I think that can be attributed to two main factors. On the one hand, perhaps customers are responding to price signals, and as the price of water and wastewater services goes up, they're responding by consuming less. So some of that is kind of a deliberate reduction in consumption levels. The other aspect is that as we see kind of general turnover in appliances, for example, within households, and as those newer appliances consume, dishwashers, washing machines, even shower heads consume less water, we see this natural decline in consumption levels as a result of that as well.
Thank you both. Any other questions from members of council? Councillor Wright.
In looking back, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, in looking back at the 2017 study, it included numbers from 2016 forward to 2026. The total water customers listed in 2016 was 3,327. Were those actual numbers, or were those kind of not made up? That's not the word I'm going for, but were they inflated to some degree? Because a question earlier here in council, I just asked what the current number on the water customers is, and they said 3,380. And looking at the 2016 number, it's only a difference of 63 customers. And I'm pretty sure we've had more than 63 customers added to those numbers since 2016.
So at the time of the 17 rate study, that process looked at what the current customer profile was, so how many customers were connected to the systems at that time. And then there was a forecasting undertaken to estimate how that customer base would increase over time. And that growth forecast was based on the growth forecast available from, again, the development charges background study at that time. So we did have an estimate of how the number of customers was going to increase over the forecast period. And so those numbers would have been based on the actuals for 2016, and then forecasting out from that point forward based on the available growth forecast at that time. Similar process that's being undertaken at this point in time is understanding the current customer base is now, and then forecasting out how that's going to evolve over time based on the available growth forecast for the municipality.
So if that was an actual number in 2016, that only accounts for 63 additional users. Do I have that wrong?
No, I think your math is dead on. I'm just not sure what is wrong, because something isn't adding up. So Peter, are you understanding the issue that we're facing this evening? Your 2016 number through this Watson and Associates 2016 number through the wastewater study was, give me the number again, Councillor Wright.
3,327, and the number presented tonight as actual customers was 3,380. So the difference of 63 customers from 2016.
We received our water compliance report this evening, and the question asked is how many customers are attached to the system, and the number we got was 3,380. So I
understand.
don't know whether that's an actual number. Maybe staff can answer that. Is the 3380 number an actual number or an assumed number? It is it is your incorrect number. And now we will get the correct number? Do we know the actual number? Director Whiteman?
3324, but that's lower than 216 residential, so.
And if I may provide some clarification on it, and my apologies, I think I was a little slow on understanding the heart of the question. So there is a difference or something to note is that there are customers, and what we refer to in the rate study are the number of billing units. So there are residential units that are charged per unit, not necessarily per meter. So if there are multiple dwelling units serviced by a single water meter, those are all charged that base charge based on the number of units, not based on the number of meters. So your total number of billing units is higher than the number of customers. And what we quote in the rate study typically is that number of billing units, because that's what the monthly base charges get applied to. And while I don't have the 2016 number in front of me, but I think the number you quoted was 3,327. So that would have likely have been the number of billing units that were each being charged that monthly base charge. And a comparable number to that as of the end of 2023 was 3,886 billing units. So there has been an increase in the number of billing units that are being charged that monthly base charge rate. I hope that provides some clarification in that regard.
Sorry, can you repeat that number again? 3,886.
And 86.
500-ish, which makes sense. That actually makes a lot more sense. Okay. All right. Anything further from members of council? Go ahead, Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you, through you. The Presqu'île Park rates, as you have listed here, are those the rates just for residential customers off of Presqu'île Parkway, or is that also the rate for Presqu'île Park itself?
Both. I think it's both. Yeah, we're getting ahead, not. So
That's correct. It's for both.
And anyone build off of that extension around the corner there. Yeah. Any other questions from members of council? Councillor Fredis.
Thank you through the chair to Peter. Peter, I'm not quite sure how to put the question, but I guess what I'm looking to you for some guidance on is there another way to run the formula? Let me give you an example. Director Whitfield gave me a document here that shows our base water rates. And as you've confirmed in your report, we're the lowest of some 20 locales that you've identified. And what we're hearing as councillors is a great deal of frustration from residents being hit with 15% increases every year for 5 years on consumption fees. So my question is, can we do something to rejig the formula so that our base rate for water is more in line with other municipalities? So that rather than seeing just a 2% adjustment there and 15% on consumption fees, can it be rejigged so that the base water rate is more in line with other jurisdictions and thereby take some of the pressure off of the consumption rates? Are you able to do that sort of analysis for us?
Yes, and indeed, I think you're just a step ahead of us here. That is something that will be looked at very closely through the second phase of this work. So typically, in terms of structuring how much revenue is coming in through the base charge versus the metered rates, we're trying to balance the need to generate some kind of or provide a certain level of revenue certainty for the municipality, which is typically achieved through the base charge component, and also balancing that out with providing some incentive for consumers to reduce or manage their consumption levels, and to make sure there's some variable component that better reflects their unique consumption levels. And so typically the base charge component is designed to recover the capital and capital related components of costs, as those are truly fixed, because regardless of how much water is ultimately being used in a system, you still have pipes in the ground, you have the water treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant, that infrastructure needs to be looked after. Whereas the operating cost components vary, not to a large degree, but they do vary somewhat with levels of consumption. And so we'll be taking a look at that composition of total costs, how that breaks out between capital and operating, and then designing the base charge components to be aligned with those capital components of costs, and with the metered rates being designed to recover the operating. And as that shifts over time, that relationship between capital and operating costs, there is typically a need to reassess and potentially to see higher. What we've seen in recent years is typically a more pronounced increase to the base charge component, and perhaps more of a tapering of the metered rates. So again, so something we'll be taking a close look at through the second phase of this work.
Thank you. That was the longest yes I've ever heard. Councillor Fredis.
Thank you. Just one more question, and I'm hopeful this is the place to raise it, but you've identified the capital shortfall we have relative to addressing infrastructure upgrades and needs. And one of the discussions we've had around this council chamber on prior occasions is the imposition of impost fees. Can or will impost fees be part and parcel of the next phase of this study to help us recover some of that capital infrastructure funding so desperately needed?
So imposed fees are a mechanism that municipalities use to recover the costs of infrastructure upgrades or expansion. So they're very similar. So, or in other words, the growth-related capital needs that arise to provide additional servicing capacity for new development, or in some cases where there is an extension of water, wastewater infrastructure to a previously unserviced area to help recover the cost of that infrastructure expansion from those previously unserviced properties. So it is something that we are going to be looking at, not necessarily directly through the water wastewater rate study. However, we are undertaking the development charges background study for the municipality at this time, and we're just currently in the process of identifying what those future infrastructure upgrades and expansions are going to be to provide that additional servicing capacity. And then the municipality has the option of whether they recover those growth-related or expansion-related capital costs through a development charge or an impost fee. The practice historically in the municipality has been to recover those costs through the development charge. But certainly the impost may be an alternative. So that is something that we'll be able to comment on further through the development charges study process.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of council? Councillor Rowley.
Thank you. So your recommendation is that effective April 1, 2024, that we should see an increase in the rates. But in the third quarter, you are coming back with the final report. Do you expect that we will see another increase then before the end of 2024?
Yes, we would expect to see a further increase, not necessarily that would be imposed before the end of 2024, but perhaps starting in January 1, 2025 and beyond, that we would expect the rates to continue increasing. And one of the reasons is, and even if there was no current infrastructure funding gap, continue to be faced with inflationary pressures, escalation, the rates need to keep increasing, at least to keep pace with that. But as noted earlier, we have identified that there is a current infrastructure funding gap. So just even to close that gap, we would expect further increases to be needed in 2025 and beyond.
Thank you. Anything further for members of council? The motion is moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon, that council receive the presentation from Peter Simcisko, Managing Partner, Watson and Associates Economists Ltd, regarding water and wastewater study. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Rowley.
Thank you. Just regarding the bylaw, do we expect that before or maybe at our next council meeting?
Well, we'll go to the staff report after this, and that might answer your question.
All right, then, thank you.
Any further questions from members of council? Thank you, Peter. We appreciate the update and information and look forward to next steps next.
Thank
All
you.
those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Okay, so now we'll head to the water wastewater fees study report, and Deputy Treasurer Puffer, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight, sir?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a motion moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon, that council receive the water and wastewater rate study from Watson and Associates and direct staff to advertise for a public meeting on March 18th, 2024. There you go. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion is carried. That brings us to reports, the minutes of advisory committees of council and review teams. The first is the committee of the whole meeting minutes of November 16th and 27th, January 29th, and February 26th. It's moved by Councillor Freda, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that council adopt the meeting minutes from the committee of the whole for the following dates: November 16th, 27th, 2023, January 29th, 2024, February 26th, 2024. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. And a motion moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon, that council approve the recommendation from the February 26th, 2024 Committee of the Whole to approve the 2024 budget with a 6.58% tax increase. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried.
Do we have a recorded vote on?
You can. Madam Deputy Clerk, a recorded vote has been requested by Councillor Rowley.
Councillor Emily Rowley,
Yes.
Councillor Jeff Wheeldon,
Yes.
Councillor Bobby Wright,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Ron Anderson,
Yes.
Councillor Byron Paredes,
Yes.
Mayor Brian Ostrander.
Yes.
That's carried.
The next comes from the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee meeting of October 5th. It's moved by Councillor Fredis, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that council receive the October 5th, 2023 Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee meeting minutes as presented. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. And a recommendation from same. It's moved by Councillor Wheeldon, seconded by Councillor Wright. The council support the recommendation from the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee, and further that council direct staff to report to council on the current state of the municipality's policies relating to equity, diversity, and inclusion, and with recommended changes to those policies. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Applefest Steering Committee. It's moved by Councillor Fredis, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that council received the minutes of the Applefest Steering Committee meeting of January 17th, 2024 as presented. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Rural Advisory, it's moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon, that Council receive the November 23rd, 2023 Rural Advisory Committee meeting minutes as presented. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. And from the Police Services Board, it's moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon. The Council appoint Northumberland County community members Lou Rinaldi and Eric Cowell to the Amalgamated Police Services Board for Northumberland County, and that Council directs staff to make funds budgeted for the Police Services Board in 2024 available to the Amalgamated Police Services Board once formed, and the Council directs staff to send this report and Council's resolution to the member municipalities that will form the Amalgamated Police Services Board, including the municipality of Trent Hills, the Township of Hamilton, the Township of Crammy, and the Township of Alnwick-Haldeman, for them to have included on their respective council agendas. Is there any discussion? I will point out that Police Services Board Chair Lou Rinaldi is in the room if we have any questions on his report. All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. It's a long night for that, Lou. But we thank you. That's good. That's good. That brings us to reports and minutes of statutory committees, boards, and external agencies. The first comes from DBIA. It's moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon. The Council received the DBIA December 12th, 2023 and January 11th, 2024 meeting minutes as presented. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. And correspondence, direction items, endorsements, communications, and petitions. A motion of request from the Lower Trent. It's moved by Councillor Wheeldon, seconded by Councillor Wright. That Council support the request from the Lower Trent Conservation for the appointment of Matthew Richmond as a representative of the Lower Trent Municipal Group on the Trent Conservation Coalition Source Protection Committee. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. And a request from the Brian Todd Memorial Community Fund, with a motion moved by Councillor Wheeldon, seconded by Councillor Wright. The Council support the request from the Brian Todd Memorial Community Fund to relocate the hops barn to municipally owned property. Is there any discussion? Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Davis kind of alluded to it a little bit, that there could be fees involved as far as demolition and reconstruction. Is that something that this council would have an appetite for, to waive those fees? Is that something that could be added to this, or should that come at a later date?
My suggestion would be that we support the request and refer it to staff for a report so that they can detail the wheres and the whys and the how we go about doing this.
All right, that would be a good plan.
That would be my recommendation. Councillor Fredis.
I would also remind Councillor Rowley that we had this issue with fees relative to the homes for the docks. The Municipal Act Section 106 precludes us from waiving those in that instance. I'm not sure if it applies here, but we should send it back to staff to have it clarified.
Councillor Wheeldon, as a mover, are you okay if I just add that to this motion? Councillor Wright is the seconder. And the council refers this motion to staff for a report. Is there any further discussion? Councillor, no, any further discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. FYI correspondence, the Northumberland County updates. It's moved by Councillor Wheeldon, seconded by Councillor Wright. The council received the Northumberland County update February 19th to March 1st, 2024 as information. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Brings us to question period. Is there anyone in the gallery with a question for members of council with regard to any item on tonight's agenda? Madam Deputy Clerk, there is no one on Zoom that I can see. Is that correct? Thank you. We have no closed session this evening. Brings us to our confirmatory bylaw, moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon, that council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the corporation of the municipality of Brighton Council meeting held on March 4th, 2024. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. And the motion you've all been waiting for, moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon, that March 4th, 2024 council meeting adjourn at 8:09 p.m. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. Thank you all very much. Drive safely.